We at WYPL are so very proud and honored to have with us today Mr. David Fleischman, a Memphis icon of the 1960s who played all over the Mid-South and was a regular on George Klein's Talent Party and known and liked by everyone. His first band was Flash and the Memphis Casuals. His second band was Flash and the Board of Directors. Hello, David.
Well, hey there, Alan. How are you?
Doing fine, thank you.
And really, it was the same band as what happened. We were the Casuals from 61 until 67, and we were offered the opening slot, the opening band for Paul Revere and the Raiders, all four of their tours that they were going to do in 1967. And so we get a phone call. You know, Paul did a lot of business with Dick Clark. And not that they were partners so much, but they were partners in certain dates, you know, gigs. And Dick Clark called Paul and said, look, I see you got this band going out called the Flash and the Casuals. He said, they're going to have to change their name because Brenda Lee's band is the Casuals and they're on the road. They're either going to have to change their name or you have to get another band. Well, it took us about a 100th of a second to decide we'll change the name. And then it became the Board of Directors. That was in 1967.
You were born and raised here in Memphis, weren't you?
I was. As I like to say, my dad came home from the service in 1945, and 9 months and 30 minutes later, I popped out. The old St. Joseph Hospital, which no longer exists, it's on the grounds where St. Jude is now.
Yes.
And that's where I was born. And when my, you know, now I think a woman gives birth and they have her out of the hospital the next day. Well, back when I was born, they let the mom stay in there for a few days. And when my mom and dad took me out of the hospital after I was born, we went to stay with my mom's sister who lived in the Lauderdale Courts, which is, of course, where Elvis lived when his family came up. And catty-corner to Lauderdale Courts, Second and what was then Winchester. It's no longer a street. When they did the freeway, they changed it around. My Uncle Jack had a grocery store, and they extended credit to the Presleys, you know, because they were having a little tough time there when they first moved up. So that was my first little thing that I shared with Elvis. I lived in the same place he did when I was a little infant.
That's great. How about your parents? Were they both from Memphis?
Yes, my mom and dad were both
born and raised here?
Memphians, and my dad's, I only had one grandparent, my dad's dad. My mother's parents were gone, and my father's mom was gone when I was born. So, and I just recently found pictures of my grandmother and my grandfather that I'm named after, my mother's parents. He's David, she was Teresa. Now, they didn't name me Teresa or a boy named Sue, but they named me Terry, so that's my middle name, David Terry. And I'm fascinated because I call all my cousins, and we've all seen the same thing, this little bitty small 2-inch picture profile, and they're older because both of them have gray, white hair, you know, and the picture itself's degraded a little bit. Well, these are 5x7s, and they're sepia toned, and my grandmother her hair is not turned white, and I'm just fascinated by it.
Yeah.
I see my aunt's got the same mouth as her mom, and my mother has the same eyes as my grandmother's, her mom. And so I'm kind of into that. So my wife and our daughter gave me an Ancestry.com thing for Father's Day because I don't know anything past them.
Do you know?
I do know where my grandfather was from Romania, and my grandmother on my mom's side was from Austria-Hungary, which don't even exist. They call them different stuff now.
No, that's
and
what
so, you know, if I could just find one more generation, I'm happy.
You will.
You know?
I'm sure you will.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask you anyway. Were they from
we
Memphis?
just have the kid, and we got to get online and do it. We've been doing so much stuff. We hadn't done it yet, but I'm going to do it ASAP.
That's fabulous. It really is. When and where were you when you first realized that music was going to be a part of your life? Was that when you were in grade school or junior high or high school?
You know, the first thing, music, that I can remember was probably, I was about 4 years old. And we went on a vacation to Biloxi, and I remember, "Won't You Come Home, Bill Bailey," and "Walking My Baby Back Home." And I remember, of course, I didn't know the word at the time, but now I realize I was moved by those songs. I remember and liking them and stuff. And we didn't have a lot of music in our house. My father liked classical music, and my mother liked show tunes, and I didn't like either one. So we would listen. We'd have some of the comedy albums, Andy Griffin, and my parents had some of the adult comedy albums, Bill Barth, Rusty Warren, that stuff. But there wasn't a lot of music. I just, at whatever age, I started with the transistor radio under the pillow, listening to Dewey Phillips, and without realizing it, I was always influenced or moved, maybe, by black music, by black artists. And, we heard that in the South. You had John R. and Hoss Allen up in Nashville. You had Dewey here. And there were very few guys in the South that were playing this music.
That's right.
And we knew about it early. And so I was into that, big time. And but I never had this desire to learn to play an instrument or any of that. And I just sort of backed into it, getting up and singing one night with the Casuals, where Randy Haspel was the singer. Next thing I knew, I was in the band. And it's been a 57-year journey.
Well, somewhere along the way, you got snagged by rock and roll.
Yes, I did. I think the most influential moment was in 1963. I was 17 years old, and I went to Ellis Auditorium downtown. And there was no such term. Remember, 63, so it's before the Civil Rights Act, still segregated, all of that stuff. And, black folks had to sit up in the balcony. Mm-hmm. Well, there was no such term at the time, but if there was, that would have been considered a black show. Because I went in and I sat with a bunch of black folks. And guess what? I didn't break out in a rash. I didn't get sick. Nothing. It was unbelievable. And there were some other white folks there, but there weren't many. There really weren't. And it was Garnett Mims, Solomon Burke, the Orlons, the Chiffons, and then James Brown.
Oh my
and when
gosh.
James came out, and remember, I had never been to a concert. I had only been at, and the band played at dances, fraternity, sorority dances. So I'm watching James Brown, man, and first of all, that's when I understood for the first time. I'd been playing for 2 years, but I understood the power of music. And I'm watching him just amazed. He was young, the band was awesome, and the tempos were really uptown. I just remember thinking, that's what I want to do. Because people got up and rushed the stage. I'd never seen that. And you could just feel that emotion. And I'm going, that's what I want to do. And that's when I understood not just the power of music, but the fact that if you do music, if you're in a band or you are a performer, entertainment has to come where it has to come in. The grunge guys in the 90s, they all looked miserable staring at their shoes. But that was entertaining for those people. That was their entertainment. But I came up in a different era where you talk to the audience, you work the room, and you work the mic, and you did all of that stuff. And nobody did it better than James. And that was the moment for me. And then, of course, the other moment was February 9th of 64, Beatles on Ed Sullivan, because there was maybe 6 or 7 bands in Memphis. And then the next week after Ed Sullivan, there was 106 bands. Of course, that changed everything. It changed the world, actually.
According to the commercial appeal, there was a band on every block in Memphis in 1964. And that's probably true.
Oh, yeah. It was amazing how that spread. Not just in Memphis, but all across the country. And I'm going to, all across the world, they made such an impact.
It was an explosion.
And then that set up, in my opinion, that was the sort of the transition from the beat generation, the rock and roll and the beat generation, into the counterculture. And of course, there were so many of us. I'm the first year of the baby boomers, and there's so many of us because we know what mom and dad did when daddy came back from the war. There's all these kids.
Yeah.
And we were the first, we were like the first generation of Caucasians to actively support the civil rights movement, women's rights, gay rights, all of that stuff. And we were the counterculture. There was a cultural war going on.
Right.
And you want to use that word? And fathers quit talking to sons, brothers quit talking to brothers. It was bad. And but it was natural, because that's the way we felt. We felt the world was not Ozzie and Harriet. It wasn't a Ricky Nelson show. That life was tough, and there were things, and there were people that weren't treated properly, and all of that stuff. And we sang about that, and wrote about that, and we tried to push that agenda to try to get what we thought. And I really think that music to our generation, is more important to us personally than music is to a 23-year-old today. They like their music, don't get me wrong, and they make the music for them. But I don't think it's as ingrained in them as it was.
So you went to Central High School, I believe.
I did.
Where'd you go to grade school and junior high?
Well, I went to Treadwell for 6 days, but it was overcrowded. And so I don't know why they picked me, but they sent me to
Is it Springdale?
Springdale, yes. I went to Springdale, and I was there for the first grade. Then we moved on Sheridan Street, and that's when I went to Valentine, Snowden, Central, Memphis State.
Yeah. What year did you start at Memphis State?
I graduated in '64. I was going to be a journalism major, and I took some journalism classes. And I think so I took a couple of classes during the summer before the fall
Regular
freshman year.
semester.
I just wanted to get I thought I wanted to get a head start, and college was exciting.
But you were very engaged in music at that time too.
That was yeah. It was. We were looking at. I found a report card recently that didn't have very good grades, and I was always a good student.
Yeah.
Up until about the 10th grade, and then, I cared so much about music that I didn't pay enough attention to trying to learn things.
Well,
I just wanted to pass the test and get out of there.
Well,
And high school was great, and I'm looking forward to a reunion with the high school people here in October. But I was in such a different place. When you play music, and we were very fortunate to work all the time, you're kind of, I don't want to make it sound more than it is, but you're kind of in a different world.
Right.
Than I hate to use the word, but normal folks. It's just a different lifestyle, different hours, all kinds of things.
Right.
And I was just geared into that, and that's the way I was. I mean, I didn't think it was weird that Elvis wanted to stay up all night and sleep till 1 o'clock. Well, that's a great idea. I couldn't do quite that, but as I tell people, this is the life I chose, and I'll get a call. It'll be 8:30 here in Memphis, and I've chilled. I've stopped working. As much as my mind will stop, and I'm down watching TV with Jay, having dinner or whatever. It's 8:30 at night, and I'll get a call from a club owner in Seattle where it's 6:30. And he's still rocking, and he wants to talk about booking an artist or this or that. So my motto is, we doze but never close.
Well, this was about the time that y'all were hitting your apex in Memphis, popularity-wise.
Yeah.
And this is also about the time the tours with the Raiders came
was
along.
67.
What lineup did you take with you on the road?
David Freener was the keyboards, Mark Tidwell was guitar, Mike Stoker was bass, and then we had a couple of different drummers. Joe Carrero Jr.
Right.
was our drummer.
Right.
And then we had Ted Garrettson and Bill Slays and Newell Tuggle on horns. Then, let's see, after the first tour, Paul fired Drake, his guitar player, his drummer, Smitty, and his bass player they call Fang, Phil Volk.
Right.
They hired Joe Jr. Offered Joe the job, and of course he took it. They
remember
offered
that.
me the bass playing job, but I didn't play an instrument. Otherwise, I'd have been a Raider. They ended up hiring Keith Allison, left-handed bass player that looked like Paul McCartney who played
Right.
Rickenbacker.
Right.
And Freddie Weller, who went on to have a little country music career, was
Absolutely.
a guitar player. So then, let's see, we got Thomas Boggs. Thomas played with us.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah.
that. Now, I knew Joe because he had taught drums at Melody Music Shop before I came along and started teaching drums, and he was a great guy from Greenwood.
Yes, he's from Greenwood,
Mississippi. Right.
I think Joe got bored playing rock and roll. He was,
think so?
he was a jazz guy. That's what he still
Well,
does.
yeah, he was great at that. Do you ever hear from him anymore?
Let's see. Joe and I's talk. It's been a number of years, but I keep in touch with Mark Tidwell, the guitar player. Mark's up in Nashville, and I always ask about Joe, and he seemed to be doing okay. He tried to break up a fight between two dogs, his dogs or something, and he got a real bad gash in his hand. If you're a drummer, that's probably not a real good thing.
Not at all.
Mark made it sound like it was pretty bad, but he recovered. He's fine.
Do you know if Joe's back in Mississippi or
No, he's in California.
he's in California?
As far as I know, I think I would have heard if he'd have
Yeah.
moved.
David, which was the first record label you got linked up with, and did you have a manager at that time when you were still in Memphis?
We never really had a manager per se. Jerry Williams helped us out quite a bit. But the first really label was, there's a guy named Larry Rosenblum. Larry is my age. We went through school, second through high school. Well, his brother, who's probably, let's see, well, I know he just told me 79, 7 years older than I was. So now I'm 17 years old, hanging out with his brother, but his brother's roommate, and they were all, I guess Steve was the same age as Stanley.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm this 17-year-old kid hanging out with these 23, 24-year-old guys when those garden apartments on Belvedere were first started.
Right.
And that was like Sin Strip,
Stay away from there.
and of course, so that's the first place I wanted to go. Steve was a very creative guy. He was also very journalistic. He wrote for the college newspaper at University of Illinois. He put together a scam. He started writing this stuff in the newspaper about a person named Verlene Skagg, who was a famous alumni, was coming back to school, and there was no such person. And they actually had bands show up and all this stuff. And so his name was Steve Blockman, and we recorded records for him. And he started a label called Block Records. We did a song called Bridget, and it was so bad we did Bridget Part 2. Bridget, what a mess. Real long hair and a real tight dress.
Oh, my goodness. So let's listen to David Fleischman and Flash and the Casuals as they do their first song called Bridget, which received airplay in Memphis on FM 89.3 WYPL.
Bridget, high school queen. She's real tough, you know what I mean. When she hears a rockin' song, she can dog it all night long. Bridget, what a mess. Real long hair and a real tight dress. When I took her to prom, they couldn't tell me where she'd come from. When she did the dog all over the place, they thought she'd come from outer space. Bridget, what a mess. Real long hair and a real tight dress. When I went to give her a ring, she did the nuttiest, craziest thing. When I told her to give her fingers to me, she said, I'll give you 2 and I'll owe you 3. Bridget, what a mess. Real long hair and a real tight dress. We had a real wild honeymoon. The white coats are coming, gonna get me soon. She's almost driving me out of my mind, 'cause every day at noon is Madison time. Bridget, what a mess. Real long hair and a real tight dress. Go, Bridget. Shake it one time for Flash. Yeah. Come on now. Dog it.
And now back to our interview with David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL.
So we did that, and that was for Steve, and that was our sort of first kind of taste of having a record label kind of deal.
Yeah.
We would go over to Roland James and do stuff for Talent Party. But that was just going
Is
in
that
the cut
where
of
that
track.
was done?
I think almost all of the things we did at Talent Party was at Roland. There were a few things when he was booked or was out of town or whatever, and we did some over at Phillips Recording over on Madison.
The first song you did that I was familiar with was I Promise to Remember. You did that in 1962.
Yes, and it sounds like it.
No, it sounds great to
Thank
me.
you.
I was 10 years old, and that was rock and roll, and I had my first little transistor
Oh, yeah.
radio. I'd ride around on my bicycle in Bethel Grove, and and I thought I was hot stuff.
Oh, we all shared that same experience.
But tell us about I Promise to Remember.
Well, it was just, we didn't write original material at that time, or ever actually, as a band. But it was just one of the songs that you did, and so we had to do something for Talent Party. We said, oh, we'll do that one. And so that's how that came to be. We did that with Roland, and we had our backup singers and all that kind of stuff in the band at the time.
Y'all did that for Talent Party?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
When I was 10, I wasn't even watching that stuff.
I got you.
A couple of years later, I got on board with all that. But I think it's a great song. I really do.
Thank
Who
you.
was that? John McNulty? And
That would have been John and David Freener, and Gary Hoffman was playing bass. David was playing guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Buddy Fowler, that was another
Buddy
guitar
Fowler.
player.
Okay. Yeah.
And me.
Okay. Let's take a moment now to listen to Flash and the Casuals as they do I Promise to Remember, a song they did at Sonic Studios here in Memphis for the George Klein Talent Party Show in 1962 on FM 89.3 WYPL.
I promise to love you no matter what you do. I promise to love you. I love you through and through. Oh, I promise to be true. Promise to remember. I promise to remember the meaning of romance. If I've done something wrong, give me one more chance. Oh, I promise to be true. Oh, well, I know I promised you I would give you my heart. So, darling, promise me that we'll never part. But I know I'm not a king, and I'm not very wise. But one thing you must realize, I promise to remember the meaning of romance. If I've done something wrong, give me one more chance. Oh, I promise to be true. Oh, well, I know I promised you I would give you my heart. So, darling, promise me that we'll never part. But I know I'm not a king, and I'm not very wise. But one thing you must realize, well, I promise to remember the meaning of romance. If I've done something wrong, won't you give me just one more chance? Oh, I promise to be true. Oh, bop cow, bop cow, bop cow, cow, doodle bop cow, bop cow, bop cow, cow.
And now back to our interview with David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL. Let's talk about the song Uptight Tonight. Tell us about the history of that song.
That was an interesting story. That was a Jim Dickinson production, and I always take great pride that Jim did one of my records. I did one for him, however you want to put it, because I'm a big fan.
Me too.
And we recorded that. I don't know I don't guess at the time it was called Ardent, which is the big studio here, but it was John Fry who was Ardent.
Right.
And John was living with his parents over by what's now the University of Memphis State at the time. And I'm not a big fan of the word garage band term because none of the bands in my era that they refer to as garage bands ever did anything in a garage. However, Uptight Tonight was literally recorded in a garage. John had a board in his bedroom, and he had the wires and cables running out his window into the garage, and that's where we recorded that. And if I remember, Joe Jr. was on drums.
I thought it was John on that one. Was it Joe?
That's Joe Jr.
Okay.
Joe Jr. was on drums. Mark played guitar, and I'm sure Jim must have played something.
Keyboards, maybe?
Yeah, it must have. They probably overdubbed that part of it. We cut that thing and put it out, and then someone told me not too awful long ago that that a 45, an old one, not pristine by any stretch, an old one sold for over $300. And I'm going, well, why didn't I keep a box or a couple of boxes?
I've heard that too. It's a collector's item, that's for sure.
It got some recognition, and it probably had as much or more to do with Jim than it did with us, but we'll take it.
Now we're going to listen to one by Flash and the Casuals called Uptight Tonight. It was done in John Fry's garage at his parents' house on FM 89.3 WYPL. And now back to our interview with David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL. And now I don't know, was Midnight Hour the next one after that? Was that the
Well, it was
next?
just a song, we always did. I love R&B. When someone says R&B, that's R&B.
Well, that was-
Pickett and Otis and all of that stuff. If you go to our daughter and you ask her about R&B, she'll call, Luther Vandross. And I'm going,
Right.
no, that's pop music.
Well, Midnight Hour was
but
kind of your signature song.
I love that song, man. Like I said, I love black music. I love the emotion. I love the soul part of it, man. I got it.
So now we're going to listen to a rare recording of Flash and the Casuals done at the Old Bitter Lemon Club that was on Poplar back in the 60s doing In the Midnight Hour on FM 89.3 WYPL.
I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour. That's when my love comes tumbling down. I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour. Well, when there's no one else around, I'm gonna take you, girl, and hold you, and do all the things I told in the midnight hour.
And now back to our interview with David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL.
And we'd go play down in Mississippi, and that was before now you get a hotel and all that. None of that. You go down there, before the freeway, whatever. It probably took 4 or 5 hours, and you play 9 to 1 or 8 to 12, and you load up and drive back.
That's
well,
right.
we could pick up first. You could pick up WLS 50,000 clear watts. But we would also listen to WDIA, who you could pick up in the Delta.
Right.
And that's when I heard B.B. King, 3 o'clock in the morning and Sweet 16, and I'm going, oh, my goodness. And that music just took over. And my best friend was Steve Holt, our drummer. Steve, and I spent a lot of time with Steve, who's black. And in fact, our daughter was born. We were at Steve's house, and Jay sat in a beanbag chair. And I really, in about 2:30 in the morning, we're going home. At about 6:30, I get the elbow. It's time to go. And I'm thoroughly convinced she sat in that beanbag chair, and it supported the baby. It supported Jennifer, and it relaxed her enough for the birth process to start. Now, I could be 100 degrees off, but that's what I think.
Yeah. Where is Steve? Where is
Steve's
Steve?
here. We talk. We still talk, man. I love him to death. I'd take a bullet for him, and he'd take one for me.
Is he still playing drums?
I think he does occasaally, but not really.
But
no.
not as
Yeah. I know he's very health conscious. He keeps telling me to eat beets.
Well, that's right.
He said they're good for
We all
you.
need to eat beets.
Yes. Stephen Andre Holt.
Well, I think I told you earlier, I just discovered all these things that your friend Bob Kite put on YouTube that I didn't know about. It came as a pleasant surprise, but there's a bunch of these things, like a Rolling Stone.
Right.
You said y'all had played at the Bitter Lemon or were at the Bitter Lemon, and you didn't know about these at the
Listen,
time.
I was just as surprised as you when he sent it to me, because back in those days, recording equipment was large, big. And I never remember anybody ever, and the Bitter Lemon was not a big place.
Right.
I never remember anybody being in there recording us. But he obviously did, and I don't know what all he did to it, but it actually, to me, sounds pretty good.
That sounds
And
fantastic.
just the sound of it from a production standpoint. And he recorded the whole thing. I think they got it on YouTube. You can, people, if you're interested, people can find it and listen. My daughter gets a big kick out of it. She goes, Daddy.
I'm Alan Heidelberg, and I'm interviewing David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL. We're going to listen now to Flash and the Casuals as they do Like a Rolling Stone again at the Old Bitter Lemon Club on Poplar Avenue in Memphis, Tennessee.
Once upon a time, feel so fine, you must have grass in your prime. Then people call, say people die, you found no flaws, you thought they were odd. Then you used to laugh about everybody that was hanging out. Now you know, not so loud. Now you know. That happened to be scrounging your next meal. How does it feel? How
And now back to our interview with David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL. Let's talk a bit about the board of directors.
Yes.
And the first one was, what was the first board of directors song that y'all released?
Busy Signal.
Busy Signal.
Yes.
That's my favorite.
That was, we were on the road with the Raiders, and we were in Montgomery, and they come get me, and they said, you have to go to Memphis tonight. And I said, well, how am I going to do that? We're on the road. And they said, well, we'll have you a flight. And it's what it was. Chips at American, had called and said, I got a song. I think we can cut a hit record with him. But we got to do it tonight. Because if I don't have it recorded by tomorrow, I have to give it to the Box Tops. So we did 2 shows, an early afternoon and a kind of an early evening show. And when that thing was over, man, it was like the movies. Guy grabbed me by the arm, and we ran out the back door, put me in a car, and they sped me to the airport. And I get on a Southern Airlines, and it was 19 guys. I think that they were all Navy, and myself.
Coming back
and
from...
it's the worst weather-wise, bumpy, whatever you want to call it, flight I've ever been on before or since. And everybody on that plane threw up but me and one sailor. And I'll never forget that. So I flew back to Memphis, went down to the Thunderbird for a few minutes, and I went to the studio and recorded the record. When you're 21 years old, you can do that sort of thing.
That's right.
And then the next morning, I went and got on a plane and flew to Birmingham, where we were doing from the next
play with the Raiders again.
Yeah, to hook back
let
up.
me ask you this: did Chips already have the soundtrack recorded by the time you got there, or were the fellas?
He had some of it, but we kind of put it. They did those head sessions. You just started, and you had the basic idea, and you sort of had the outline, and then you just kept working and working.
Well,
but he knew what he wanted.
Was Gene Chrisman there on drums?
Oh yeah, it was the
Reggie
and Gene
on
and Tommy Cogbill and Bobby Emmons and Bobby Wood. Who am I forgetting? Guitars. Reggie.
This is.
Oh yeah, they were the best. I mean, they recorded all those hits.
Well, the first time I heard it on WMPS, I immediately went to Pop Tunes on Summer and bought the single, which I certainly still have. And that's one of my favorite songs of all times.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great song.
Yeah, we got a little bit of a nibble. They called us at one point and said, or were told, that the band should be ready because it might have an opportunity to go to England. Of course, we were excited. It's 67. It's England, man. That's the Beatles. But, of course, that never happened. But it was nice to be excited about it for a little bit.
And now let's take a minute to listen to Flash and the Board of Directors as they do Busy Signal, one of my favorite songs that they recorded at American Studios with Chips Moman on FM 89.3 WYPL.
I didn't mean it when I said goodbye.
And now back to our interview with David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL. Now the next one was, your next single was?
I can't really remember the order. It might have been Goodbye Deborah Lewis.
Tell us about Goodbye Deborah Lewis.
Goodbye Deborah Lewis.
Who wrote
was,
that?
George Klein and Mark James.
Yeah.
And Mark wrote Suspicious Minds.
Right.
And if he never wrote anything else, he'd still own the 3 or 4 houses he's got.
Absolutely.
And everything else. Yeah, that was, I didn't personally like the records we were recording because I was more, like I said, I was more into black music, more into R&B, and this is what I would call more popish. And I'm pretty sure I'm accurate when I say that we were the only band probably in history that ever had a record deal, and this was a major label, so to speak. It was, if it wasn't major, it was a mid-major. You know, it was certainly credible box tops,
right,
and all of that. But I think we're the first band to make records at that level, and we never played one song live, not ever, because it wasn't what we did, and we just never learned any of it. Yeah, I guess if we wanted to become a hit, we'd have learned it and had to do it, but that didn't happen.
We're now going to listen to one by David Fleischman and Flash and the Board of Directors called Goodbye Deborah Lewis, written by George Klein and Mark James, done again at American Studios on FM 89.3 WYPL. And now back to our interview with David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL. How about Love Ain't Easy? How did that?
Love Ain't Easy. Really, the way it worked is they'd call me in. They'd say, "Listen, we got this song, and here's how it goes. You think you can do this? You want to do? Wasn't that I want to? Do you think you can do it?" Type deal. And I was game for anything, because, Chips was producer of the year. Whatever he wanted to do, I'm fine with it. I'm 21 years old.
Did this come after Deborah Lewis?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
That was, and really I like the songs now that I listen to them. We've been back 14 years, moved back in 2004, and someone brought me a CD of all of those songs. I started listening to them, and I liked them for the first time. I really liked them, and I went, well, they sounded just like the rest of those records that were the hits and stuff. So I like them much more now than I did then.
I love them. I listen to them now, and it's so indicative of the great stuff that was coming out of Memphis in 1968. I mean, it's just, there it is in your face. Now we're going to listen to one that David did with Flash and the Board of Directors called Love Ain't Easy on FM 89.3 WYPL.
Tried so many times to forget you. Wonder if I'll ever be the same. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I can't get used to losing you. Oh, it's so hard to find someone that really loves you true. Love ain't easy. Oh no. Love ain't easy. Oh no. Yesterday my life was bright and sunny. When you walked away it wasn't funny. You just let go of my hand, find yourself another man. Oh, it's so hard to find someone that really loves you true. Love ain't easy. Oh no. Love ain't easy. Oh no. If you find that certain girl that really loves you so, take a tip from one who knows and never let her go. Let her go now. Guess I'll go somewhere and cry my eyes out. Only wish that she had loved me too. I guess if I should pass her by, I think I'd break right down and cry. Oh, it's so hard to find someone that really loves you true. Love ain't easy. Oh no. Love ain't easy. Oh no. It's so hard to find someone that really loves you true. It's so bad, love ain't easy when she don't love you. Love ain't easy. Oh no. Love ain't easy. Oh no. Love ain't easy. Oh no. Love ain't easy. Oh no.
And now back to our interview with David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL.
Love Ain't Easy. I love that.
Oh,
and
it's
and I
wonderful.
really like that song, When the Love Light is Shining in Your Eyes.
Now, was that a flip side?
That
or-
was, I think Daryl Carter wrote that. It was just, it had a lyric. Your love is like a cold and empty furnace. That's how I've always really, really liked that song.
Here's a song that spotlights David's soulful voice remarkably well, called When the Love Light is Shining on FM 89.3 WYPL.
When the love light is shining in your eyes, I can hear my heart saying surrender. Your luscious candy lips so, so tender. When the love light is shining in your eyes, it's only seldom that you look my way.
So now we're going to listen to a song called Lost in a World of Hurt, written by Mark James and Glenn Spreen, and done by Flash and the Board of Directors on FM 89.3 WYPL.
Once I thought I had it all, but I was blind, I could not see that I took your love for granted. Now you turned away from me, and now I'm lost. I'm in a world of hurt. I feel so lost. I'm in a world of hurt. Why did you build a wall to keep me away from you? Do you think there is a chance I can find my way back to you? Because I'm lost. I'm in a world of hurt. I feel so lost. I'm in a world of hurt. I didn't feel the pain till after you were gone. And now I feel so bad, said it all Why did you build a wall to keep me away from you? Do you think there is a chance I can find my way back to you? Because I'm lost. I'm in a world of hurt. I feel so lost. I'm in a world of hurt. I didn't feel the pain till after you were gone. And now I feel so bad, said it all alone. Now I ain't got nobody, no one to call my own. I got to have her. She went away and left me, and now I'm sitting all alone. I'm lost, can't find my way, and now I'm lost, living in a world of hurt. Yes, I'm lost. I'm in a world of hurt. I feel so lost.
I'm Alan Heidelberg, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to my interview with David Fleischman as much as I've thoroughly enjoyed interviewing him. Be sure to tune in on Monday, October 15th for our second segment of our interview with our great friend and Memphis music icon of the 60s, Mr. David Fleischman, on FM 89.3, City of Memphis Radio, WYPL.
You're listening to FM 89.3 WYPL Memphis, a broadcast service of the Memphis Public Libraries and the City of Memphis.
Hello, I'm Alan Heidelberg with Memphis Music Memories, and we are once again honored to have with us an icon of 1960s Memphis music, Mr. David Fleischman, who most of his friends and former band members refer to as Flash, a nom de plume that David later found out his dad had while he was a veteran of World War II. On the first segment of our interview with David, we discussed events leading up to and during his band heydays of the 60s, their recordings, and their U.S. tours with Paul Revere and the Raiders. In this second segment, we will focus more so on David's life near the end of the band heydays and launch into his professional career in the entertainment business with Atlantic and MCA Records. I will also draw upon his memories and his vast knowledge of the entertainment industry. Hello, David.
Well, hey there, Alan. How are you?
Doing fine, thank you. And somewhere in your life, David, a very magical thing happened, and you met this girl, and when
Yes,
and
I
where?
Well, it was a Wednesday night. We were playing at the El Toro, which was a club that was part of Poncho's of West Memphis. You know, when you perform or if you give a speech And there's a lot of people, you look to the left, you play to the right, you play to the, you play to the people in the back and all of that. And you got to remember, this was in that window between the advent of the birth control pill and the onset of AIDS and HIV. And so we're on the radio here, so we'll make this delicate. But a lot of people were having a lot of fun a lot of the time. You can make it at anything you want. And so the last thing on my mind really was a steady girlfriend, much less a wife. I turned to the right, and a couple were walking in. The guy I knew, I'd never seen the girl in my life. I was 23 years old, and I'll be the first to admit, very chauvinistic, the first thing I noticed was her shape. And then she turned, and I could see her left profile, left side of her face, and she turned around, and our eyes met, and something happened. I can't describe it. I can't tell you what it is. I don't even try to anymore. I just accept it.
Magic.
And it was literally love at first sight. I introduced myself to her at the break. I went over because I knew the guy she was with. We were friends. It was a Wednesday. She was trying to get out of her apartment. I was back living with my parents. I said, well, hey, why don't I come to your place? Check it out. And so I went over there on Sunday, 4 days later, and constantly on my mind for those several days. And I went over, and I don't know, I stayed an hour and a half, and it was weird because she had lived by me in the neighborhood a couple of times, and we had a ridiculous number of very close friends who were very close friends
But
of
you
mine.
still didn't know each other.
I'd never seen this woman or girl in my life. She used to come down at the Thunderbird, but the place was packed, and there was a lot of people that came down there that I didn't necessarily see. I went over on that Sunday. I stayed for about an hour and a half. Then I said, listen, I have to leave. I have to go to TJ's because they have a jam session in red beans and rice. And I've often wondered, why didn't I say, you want to go with me? But I didn't. I went over to TJ's, and I wasn't there 10 minutes. And I went to Herbie O'Mell, and may rest in peace. And I said, Herbie, can I use your phone? And so he said, sure. So he and I go in the office, and I called Jay back. And I said, man, can I come back over? And she said, yes. And I went back over and never left. And the only thing we disagree, we never argue, but we disagree. She thinks we knew each other 6 weeks. I think it was 9. October 2018 will be 49 years we've been married.
That's wonderful.
Oh, man, she's
That
an
is
angel that
great.
walks among us.
She is. She's an angel, just like you said.
Oh, that's what she is, man. She's who knows where I'd be if I had not met her. My life would have been completely different. Because there were times that were a little dark, but man, she just sees beauty, and she taught me to I'll never slow down, and I'll never stop and smell the roses. I'm just not wired that way, but she definitely got me to slow down and smell the roses. So that's her.
I'm a firm believer nothing happens by accident.
No, the same way. There are no mistakes.
It was meant to happen.
Yeah, kismet.
I do believe in miracles, and David Fleischman least expected it when this miracle plummeted into his life. We're going to dedicate this song now to David and Jay by the Board of Directors, called When the Love Light is Shining on FM 89.3 WYPL.
When the love light is shining in your eyes, I can hear my heart saying surrender. Your luscious candy lips so tender. When the love light is shining in your eyes, it's only seldom that you look my way. You're like a shadow on a rainy day, but once you turn the sunshine on, ain't no doubt my blues are gone. Once you get me in your trance, I'm a goner. When the love light is shining in your eyes, I can hear my heart saying surrender.
And now we'll resume our interview with Mr. David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL. Tell us how you came to know George Klein and later became a regular on his show.
Well, I turned 16 on a Monday. It was March 11th, 1962. And kids didn't go out at night, or most kids didn't go out during school night, But Friday night, the 15th of March, I asked my parents if I could take the car. And of course, like any parent in that situation, well, where are you going to go? And I said, well, I'm going to go uptown to the Hotel Chiska because I want to meet this disc jockey named George Klein. I had heard, I knew who he was. At the time, there's always been a decent-sized Jewish population here, so most of the Jewish families, if you didn't really know them, you certainly knew of them. And in my house, George was known as Dora's son. That was his mom.
Yeah.
And so they said, okay. So I went up to I did two things. I drove down Beale Street, which I had never been on, and I went, wow, this is different. I wish I had time to explore it, but I got something else on my mind. So I went to the Chiska, and I just waited outside the door, and he played "Goodnight, My Love" as his last song, and I waited. It seemed like an eternity. Probably wasn't that long. The door opened, and there he was, that same GK that we all know. He's got that great smile, and I introduced myself. He was incredibly pleasant and nice. He invited me in, and then he took me to that room where the magic happened. And I'm going, oh, that's the place. Because, there was no computers, no cell phone, none of that. We got our music from radio, a little bit of TV, the fan magazines. And, man, I'm in the room where the music, where the magic happened and all of that. And that was the start of what's now it was 1962, so what is that, 56-year friendship.
Yeah.
I can never, ever, nothing I could do could ever repay George for everything he's done for me. He booked us. I mean, that's why I wanted to see him.
Right.
I met all these guys. Once I got in the record business, I met program directors, music directors that wanted to meet disc jockeys because they wanted to be in radio. Well, I wanted to meet him because he booked bands and I was in a band. He booked Lakeland, the drag strip out there. And he booked us, and that was the start of this long-term relationship that I genuinely treasure. He put us on his Christmas shows, and he just used us all the time.
Well, you
put
were
us
on
on
his
Talent Party.
Talent Party every other week, yeah.
Well, we were on there were a few years where we were on a handful of times a year, whatever it was. And then we went through a little stretch where we alternated weeks with a girl named Sherry Grooms.
Right.
And if you're on TV, I don't care what you're on. Infomercial, Dave Brown, the weatherman, I don't care who you are. If you're on TV for
You're a star.
lot, well, people know you.
They know you.
Because we were gone for 27 years. 26 of those years we came back for Christmas. And we'd always go. Goldsmiths was the first, they weren't even cards. They were charge-a-plays for those old enough to remember those things. And I just always kept the credit card because it was just sentimental. And we'd go by, charge a little bit, and we'd go back to New York, California, Dallas, wherever we were at the time. I'd pay them off a little bit a month. And I kept the card. And probably, I don't think I'm exaggerating, when out of those 26 times, half of those times somebody would come up to me in Goldsmith going, aren't you? They didn't know exactly how to ask. And I'm going, wow. I say the same thing still. It's nice to be remembered. It is. You don't think about that stuff when you're doing it. You're just doing it.
Okay, now let's take a minute to listen to one of the first songs that Flash ever did on the George Klein Talent Party show, called "I Promise to Remember" on FM 89.3 WYPL.
Ooh, the baba cow, cow. Ooh, the baba cow, cow. I promise to love you no matter what you do. I promise to love you. I love you through and through. Oh, I promise to be true. I promise to remember the meaning of romance. If But one thing you must realize, well, I promise to remember the meaning of romance. If I've done something wrong, won't you give me just one more chance? Oh, I promise to be true.
And now back to our interview with David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL. One of my favorite David Fleischman stories that you told me is that when you and Jay were married and you lived over by Overton Square.
Yes.
And you said things got kind of tough.
1973.
But
That was rough.
other things happened around that time. Tell us about all that.
Well, is what happened was we lived in the bottom of a house that was on Madison, right across from where Anderton's was.
Right.
Some people have since bought the home and really refurbished it. We went up to try to get in, but they didn't want to let us in. And that's fine. But you could just look and see they had fixed it up. And we were just, and I was a popsicle man. I worked sold vacuum cleaners door to door. I did construction. It was a very, very, very difficult year financially for us. The band had broken up. I was trying to figure out, I'd never done anything else. What am I going to do with my life? How's it going to go? I got a daughter. I have these responsibilities. Well, I don't know. Somehow or another, we had enough money. We walked down to Overton Square, and I bumped into a guy named Frank Turner. Frank had been the bouncer, or a bouncer at the Thunderbird for probably 2 of the 3 years we were there. He had gotten in the record business, and he worked for a company called WEA, which is Warner like Warner Brothers Records,
right.
Elektra Records, and Atlantic Records. WEA was the distributor, owned by all the same corporation, Warner Communications, owned the distributor and owned the 3 different labels. So I saw Frank, I hadn't seen him in a while, and we exchanged pleasantries, and he said, man, I've been thinking about you. I wanted to get in touch with you to see if you'd be interested in interviewing for a job. And I went, yeah, what's the job? And well, at the time, when WEA was formed, when Warner Communications built this entertainment group that they had, they were using one guy in each market that did all 3 labels. But the companies had gotten so big that they were splitting it up. And they started in the major markets. Well, now they'd gotten down to Memphis. So I said, well, how's it work? And Frank says, I want to do Warner Brothers. He said, and whoever does Warner Brothers has to do Elektra. So the job's an Atlantic Records job. Now, how life is so strange. 10 years before, again, when I'm 17, hanging out with Steve Blockman and those guys, we go across the street to Jerry Williams' apartment, and I meet this guy. Black suit, black turtleneck, looked like the guys from the French Underground and the World War II movies, black beard, black curly hair. Loudest person I'd ever been around in my life, but seemed to be having more fun than anybody. And his name was Dickie Klein. And Dickie was a promotion person for King Records at the time, James Brown.
Right.
I would see him for the next few years. I would see him a couple of times, maybe a year, when he'd come into town to take George out or people at WMPS, and we might end up at the same place. So we had a little bit of a relationship. And then when I started working at the Thunderbird, that's where everybody came. So he was coming down there all the time when he was coming into town. We played a set, and he came up to me and said, can I borrow your apartment? Because they couldn't rent the apartment above the bandstand because we played so late. And I kind of looked at him funny, like, yeah, I guess so. Clean up, here's the key. So he comes back down, and we play another set, and then a guy named Don Burt, who worked for a label called Date, which was a Columbia Records subsidiary.
Right.
And he says, can I borrow your apartment? And I'm thinking, maybe I should charge him by the hour or something. I don't know. And he said, I want to play George a record. And as what it was a cover battle of Mr. Bojangles. Dickie had the one on Atlantic, and Don had the one on Date Records, and they were both trying to get George to play their version. Anyways, that was Dickie. And so, boom, we go. I meet Frank. I interview for the job. 8 other people. I'm the only one. I'd made records, but I didn't know anything about the business, really. But who was the senior vice president of promotion at Atlantic Records in New York City? Dickie Klein. So he's what in the business. He's what I call. He's my rabbi. He's the one that brought me in. Yes, that's how all that started, man. And then that was 17 years at Atlantic.
Incredible.
Yeah, it was just
Couldn't have happened at a better time.
Oh, exactly. It was tough. I don't know. But like you said, everything happens for a reason. There are no mistakes and all that sort of stuff. So it worked out. I'm a happy camper.
We're going to stop here and listen to a rare recording that David and the band didn't know was being done at the Old Bitter Lemon on Poplar Avenue back in about 1965. This is their version of Hey Joe on FM 89.3 WYPL.
Hey Joe, where you going with all that money in your hand? Hey Joe, where you going with all that money in your hand? I'm gonna find my girl, she's going out with another man. I'm gonna find my girl, she's going out with another man. Hey Joe, what you doing with that pearl handle 44? Hey Joe, what you doing with that pearl handle 44? I'm gonna find my girl, she ain't going out on me anymore. I'm gonna find my girl, she ain't going out on me anymore. All right. Hey Joe, what you gonna do after you shoot your girl? Hey Joe, what you gonna do after you shoot your girl? I'm gonna find me a new one if I have to go all around the world. I'm gonna find me a new one if I have to go all around the world. Hey Joe, what you gonna do if your new girl's like the one before? Hey Joe, what you gonna do if your new girl's like the one before? I'm gonna shoot her in the head with my pearl handle 44. I'm gonna shoot her in the head with my pearl handle 44. All right. Hey Joe, what you gonna do if you can't find a girl that's true? Hey Joe, what you gonna do if you can't find a girl that's true? I don't know what in the world I'm gonna do. Don't know what in the world I'm gonna do. Well Joe, where are you gonna go? Hey Joe, won't you tell me where you gonna go? I'm going down to the land where the grassroots grow. Yeah, I'm going down to the land where the grassroots grow. All right. One more time.
And now we'll resume our interview with Mr. David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL. Tell us about your world-class radio program with John Scott.
Well, John, for those that don't know, and I don't think legendary is overusing the word.
No, not at all.
FM 100 in Memphis in the late 60s, 66, 67, started playing not top 40 music, but album cuts, deeper tracks,
Right.
and long things, and playing to the counterculture. That's the best way I can describe it. And they were all stars. Everybody, all those jocks, man, because they were doing something new to this generation. There were so many of us. But John was sort of the star of the stars.
Absolutely.
And we did not know each other, but when I started working for Atlantic, all the promotion guys went to WHBQ and WMPS at the same days.
Right.
And he and I met, and we just something. he knew who I was from the band. I knew who he was from radio. It was one of those things where we just clicked immediately. We remained good friends. And he called me one night, what's it going on, 10, 11 years ago? And he said, I got an idea. And I said, John's an idea guy. I said, well, what is it? And he said, I'm thinking about we should do a radio station, play Memphis music. And he said, what do you think? And I said, let me sleep on it. Let me think about it. I said, well, on the surface, yeah, it sounds good, but let me think about, once you say yes, what all does that entail? And so I woke up the next day and I called him back. I said, John, I think it's a great idea. And the reason I think it's a great idea is because there's so much music. You can do it here. I mean, you can't do it in Boise. What kind of musical history do they have? They might have had 6 bands over the last 50 years. But we have this vast heritage, plus the new people. New artists are the lifeblood of the industry. So we want to play the Amy LaVeres and John Paul Keyes and Southern Avenue and all of the newer artists. And so I called John and I said, man, I think it's great. And we argued about, I said, I think the only 2 towns that could do this are Memphis and New Orleans. And he said, no, I think Chicago too. And I said, I don't know. You got the Buckinghams in Chicago and the rest is all that chess blues stuff. I said, there might be a few more. Maybe the Buckinghams, if I'm not mistaken.
Crying Shames.
And he said Philadelphia. And I said, you know what, maybe Philly, because they had the early rock and roll guys, the Fabians and all that, and then the Gamble and Huffs and the whole sound of Philadelphia. But I knew Memphis. In other words, people will listen, but they don't want to hear the same song every day, an older song. And so we just started. And we're partners with the Memphis Convention and Visitors Bureau. They understand, they promote Memphis. And, of course, a big part of promoting Memphis is Memphis music. And Kevin Kane, he said, this is just a natural. He said, to be honest, the board's probably going to look at me and say, how come you didn't think of this? So we've been on the air doing it. And like I said, it's a labor of love for both John and I. Music's been so good to both of us.
Let's stop here for a moment and listen to Flash and the board of directors doing Love Ain't Easy on FM 89.3 WYPL.
Tried so many times to forget you. Wonder if I'll ever be the same. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I can't get used to losing you. Oh, it's so hard to find someone that really loves you true. Love ain't easy. Oh no. Love ain't easy. Oh no. Yesterday my life was bright and sunny. When you walked away it wasn't funny. Just let go of my hand. Find yourself another man. Oh, it's so hard to find someone that really loves you true. Love ain't easy. Oh no. Love ain't easy. Oh no. If you find that certain girl that really loves you so, take a tip from one who knows and never let her go. Let her go now. Guess I'll go somewhere and cry my eyes out. Only wish that she had loved me too. I guess if I should pass her by, I think I'd break right down and cry. Oh, it's so hard to find someone that really loves you true. Love ain't easy. Oh no. Love ain't easy. Oh no. It's so hard to find someone that really loves you true. It's so bad, love ain't easy when she don't love you. Love ain't easy. Oh no.
And now back to our interview with David Fleischman, and we're going to discuss why he decided to move from L.A. back to Memphis on FM 89.3 WYPL.
We were in L.A., been there 14 years, had no plans to move back to Memphis. We have one daughter. She has one son. We have one grandson. And we're very close. I mean, very close. And they moved. She was working for Mo Austin, the legendary Mo Austin, ran Warner Brothers Records for 40 years or something. And she was his executive assistant at DreamWorks. She had worked for Geffen Records. And when David Geffen's secretary came up to her assistant as they were leaving and said, look, I don't know what these three guys are going to do, Katzenberg, Spielberg, and Geffen. He said, but give me your resume, who knows? And she ended up being Mo's assistant for the whole 8 years. Then the DreamWorks Inc. sold the label to Universal. So Mo's worth several $100 million, and it's no fun for people his age, probably people my age, if you had done it before, where we worked really hard. I mean, really hard. But boy, we got to play hard too. And I just think it's a different, no doubt, it's a different business now. But I've enjoyed all of it, man. I just feel like I've had this great, blessed life, man, and all this fun, exciting stuff that I thought was exciting. So I really have no complaints. I got decent health, good health, as a matter of fact. And, I still love music. I still get that rush when I hear something, new music that really grabs me and moves me, I love that.
It's in your soul.
Yeah, it's become part of it. It wasn't there, I don't think, when I started. But it became, I got it.
Definitely.
I understood,
City of Memphis Chief Engineer Vance Durbin helps me produce these shows and makes them sound good. This is one of his favorite songs called I Pray for Rain by Flash and the Board of Directors on FM 89.3 WYPL.
I pray for rain. I pray for rain. Picnic basket filled with goodies, perfectly for you and your new love. To have dinner on the ground. I pray for rain. I pray for rain. If it rains, it won't be groovy for you and your new love. To share the new love that you found. I pray for rain. I pray for rain. Rainy season setting in on you and your new love. I'll be seeing you again.
And now back to our interview with David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL. Tell us some good Elvis stories. You got some, I know.
I got a couple. The first thing that happened when Elvis would be making movies, when they were through making movies in California, they would come back to Memphis. And they had a lot of, obviously, downtime. George got, I know people use that term, the Memphis Mafia. I never used that. To me, they're the guys. It was
Right.
Elvis and the guys. And he would bring Richard Davis and Alan Fortas and Marty Lacker and Charlie Hodge, and I think Jerry Schilling came a few times, the guys.
Right.
They liked us, And they talked to Elvis, who I believe went to the Manhattan Club quite a bit on New Year's Eve, or sometimes just had something at his house, at Graceland. And so the guys talked him into renting the club, and he did. But now before that, Alan, I would always go sit and talk to him, and Alan said, "You need to come to the movies." And I looked at him, I'm going, "What are you talking about? What movies?" And he said, "Well, Elvis rents movies, and we show them at the Memphian. You know where that is?" "Yeah, I know where that is." And he said, "Well, you should come watch movies with us." I said, "Well, I'm working it." I said, "I work. I work from 9 to 1, 9 to 2. He said, No, we don't even get started till 12:30, 1 o'clock. I said, "Oh, okay. Well, how does it work?" He said, just come. Red West was another one. Red was the one that was at the door to let people in and out. And if he didn't want you in, you did not get in.
Absolutely.
Just that. And then just that simple. So I would go to the movies with him. And we were never like friendly, He knew who I was because he watched Talent Party regularly.
Right.
I knew he was because he was Elvis Presley. So we might meet as he was walking, and we kind of nod and exchange pleasantries and all of that sort of stuff. The first time I met him, I was incredibly intimidated. I tell people I've only been intimidated 3 times by a person. The first time I met Elvis, after that, everything was fine. The first time that I met Ahmet Ertegun, who owned Atlantic Records, and I was just in awe of. But after that, everything was fine. I said, the first time I met Sam Phillips, and every time after that. Sam was a feisty guy, man. He was
sure
unbelievably
was.
great, and we owe him, that man, a debt of honor. But boy, he was. I was always intimidated being around him.
One of a
so we
kind.
played, and we did it for 2 years, and then the third year, he rented TJ's where Ronnie Millsap was the house band, but they hired us to come over later and play, and we did that. Then I would go to the fairgrounds with them, and we're riding the Dodgem cars, the bumper cars.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm riding around, hitting this guy, and then all of a sudden I turn around, the rubber tires.
Right.
I make that turn, and there he is, 25 feet in front of me. There's Elvis, and he'd stopped his car, and he's leaning back, got his arm on the back of the car, and he's just looking at me, and he's smiling, and he knows exactly what's going on. I'm hung up and don't know what to do. Did he hit the guy? Did he not hit the guy? I don't want to blow this stuff hanging out with Elvis Presley. You kidding? I don't want to blow this. And about that time, Red West hit me from behind. He stood up in his car, and I mean, it hurt. It hurt. My arm hit the big, because they're big, thick steering wheels, if you remember.
Yeah.
But you want to be cool and not let it know it hurt. But guess what? It hurt. So anyways, I did that and all of that stuff, and that really was the extent of it. We went to...
Well, you played for him.
the 3 times, the 2 New Year's Eve, 3 New Year's Eve,
Right.
twice at the Thunderbird, the third year with Ronnie Millsap.
Right.
We played late. We played Thunderbird and then went to TJ's. That's where our guitar player, unbeknownst to me, bet our saxophone player that he wouldn't cut in on Elvis and Priscilla when they were dancing. And I'm sitting there talking to somebody, and I just happened to see the dance floor. And, of course, Elvis and Priscilla are dancing slow dance, and other people were dancing on this dance floor, which wasn't that big, but they gave them room, And next thing I know is I see Robert walking up and tapping Elvis on the shoulder. I'm going, oh, my goodness. There all this stuff goes. Because I was the only one. The rest of the guys didn't go. They just had invited me. And I'm going, well, that'll be over with. No more movies, no more fairgrounds. That sucks. But no one said a word. It wasn't like and he let him do it.
He did?
So I've told this story a few times, and people said to me, because I said, man, I feel like I owe her an apology, Priscilla. And they said, she'll never remember that. And I said, are you nuts? How many times in their married life do you think they were dancing together and somebody tapped Elvis on the shoulder to cut in? I said, she'll remember. So when they opened the guest house at Graceland, I went out to participate in that. I walk in the big theater, and the first person I see is James Burton, and I ran right up to him, and I introduced myself and said, man, I'm a huge fan. I'm from Ricky Nelson to everything. You're great. Thank you for all your musical contributions, and I'll leave you alone, but I just wanted to introduce myself and say hello. And then as I turned around, Priscilla's right next to me. She's talking to someone. I'm kind of standing there, and she got through, and I grabbed her by the arm, and she looked at me, and I said, Priscilla, and I introduced myself. I said, you probably don't remember because we were never officially introduced, but I'm the guy that was singing in that band, and I told her who it was, and she kind of she remembered that
I'm
part
sure
of it.
she did.
And I said, man, I've been carrying something for 47 years. I felt like I've owed you an apology. And she looked at me like, what the hell are you talking about? And she said, well, what is it? And I told her the story, and I said, I just feel like, I don't know if it caused any friction, but I was mortified, and I felt like I owe you an apology. I said, no, so I apologize. And you know what? She looked at me like she had no clue what I was talking about. But she was a very gracious and lovely woman, man. She was very sweet.
She's a beauty queen.
Yeah.
Here's another rare bird recording that was done surreptitiously at the Bitter Lemon Club that was on Poplar back in about 1965. This is Flash and the Casuals doing I Feel Good on FM 89.3 WYPL.
I feel good. Knew that I would now. I feel good. All right. Knew that I would now. So good. I got you. I feel like sugar and spice. I feel nice. Oh, have mercy. Sugar and spice. So nice. So nice. I got you. Hey. When I hold you in my arms, I can do no wrong. And when I hold you in my arms, I can't do you no harm. And I feel nice, sugar and spice. I feel nice, all right, sugar and spice. So nice, I got you. Hey. When I hold you in my arms, I can do you no wrong, child. And when I hold you in my arms, can't do you no harm. And I feel nice, sugar and spice. I feel nice, sugar and spice. So nice, I got you. I feel good. I knew that I would. I feel good. I knew that I would. So good, I got you. So good, I got you. So good, I got you.
And now we'll resume our interview with Mr. David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL. David, you've known the music business from every side imaginable, from Memphis and to New York and beyond. I would like to ask your opinion as to what caused Memphis to lose the magic of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and what you think it will take to catapult us back into the limelight of the halcyon days that Memphis was so famous for in the years gone by.
That's probably something they could teach a course at the University of Memphis. I think that there is this independent spirit in Memphis. You know, we're a river town, and all river towns are the same. They're kind of a little blue, a little bawdy, a little rough around the edges. And I don't mean this in any offensive way whatsoever, but you put a $5,000 suit on Memphis, and it's still going to look a little frumpy. That's who we are. Zebo got it for the Grizzlies. We're a working class city. And yes, we've got some very well-off people financially and all of that do great, wonderful things. But by and large, we're a blue-collar city. And there's always been this independent streak. And I think at one point, whatever, in the 70s maybe, Judd Phillips actually had an office here for Polygram.
Right.
But other than that, there's never really been a business. In other words, labels. They would come in. REM happens out of Athens, and next thing you know, they're going down to Georgia and signing everybody. Pearl Jam happens out, or Nirvana happens out of the Northwest Seattle, Everybody goes to go there to find people. So maybe some of that stuff can happen, but the business is completely different. All of the old rules, the way we did it and all of that doesn't exist anymore. It's no longer, to be honest, about selling records. It's about streaming. How many streams can you get? And yes, people sell records. There's a few artists that sell big numbers, the millions, but most don't. And I just think that the thing for Memphis, number one, it would be great if we could get somebody out of here to have a real hit record. That would be fantastic. And I know Uptown Funk, people tried to put it in that category, and as that magnificent project as that was, and all of the great stuff it brought to Memphis, you know, the people that made that record aren't here now. They left. Bruno left.
Right.
Ronson left.
Right.
And so I want to see somebody from Memphis, a Memphis artist, and then maybe that'll draw some attention, because whatever you want to chalk it up to, the dirt, the mud, the river, the air, or the water, the beautiful water we have, there's talent here. And you are absolutely right. I've been everywhere in the United States, every major market, and a whole lot of the secondaries and some tertiary markets. Gillette, Wyoming, you know. There's no place I've ever been where there were so many local, or areas probably better, so much talent. I mean, these great players, great singers, great writers, just all of that stuff.
Massive.
And it'll always be here. It's just now it's about, in my opinion, it's about making a career. I tell young artists, I said, listen, I think the average lifespan for a man is 76 and a female is 77. I said, but you know, that means a lot of us live to 80 and 90, and some unfortunately pass in their 50s. And I said, but let me tell you something. You go to the grocery store and you fill up your grocery cart. When you get to the checkout stand, they don't care that you're 80. You got to pay for your groceries. I said, so unless you were born into a wealthy family, you marry into a wealthy family, or your business acumen has put you financially where you're secure for the rest of your life. Other than that, we're all going to probably be working up until lunch of the day we die. I mean, that's just the way it is. And so it's about building a career as an artist. If you build a career, that means building fans, and they will stay with you, and which means that they'll buy your CD, they'll come to your show, and they'll buy your CD, and they'll buy your T-shirt. I think it was Jerry Williams. Someone told me they went down to see Leonard Skinner at the casino. He said they had a big cigar-sized box, and you open it up, and it's a guitar pick, and that said Leonard Skinner on both sides. They were selling for $10 a piece. I mean, I think you could probably get a gigantic box full of guitar picks for $10.
$10, yeah.
But so that's the deal. You know, you used to tour to support your record, now, or your album. Now it's just a merchandising tool, and it's so. I mean, I'm still into the thing about real musicians all playing together at the same time in the same place. And I get overdubbing, no problem. But now, you know, the bass they'll cut a drum track here in Memphis, and the guy will on his Pro Tools, he'll send it to Sweden, and some bass player puts a bass, and they'll send it to England, and somebody sings. I understand, I'm not putting it down, but it is just totally different than the environment and the way that I grew up with, the studio system I grew up with. So I just think that the people that, you know, people always ask me, should I get into, you know, should I pursue a career in music? And I always say no, because if you have what it takes, you'll pay no attention that I said no. If you listen to me, then you didn't have what it takes to begin with, then no sense going.
Brother Vance and I don't always agree on everything, but we do agree on this song. We both think Busy Signal should have been not only a national hit, but an international hit. So let's listen now to David and the board of directors doing Busy Signal on FM 89.3 City of Memphis Radio.
Operator, will you help me reach my number? I'm having trouble dialing. I've tried to reach my party for the last 2 hours or so. We had a little buzz just yesterday. Now I wanna reach my baby to say I didn't mean it when I said goodbye. I'm sorry for signal. A silly quarrel that broke her heart. I should have known from the very start I'd be sorry. Oh, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean it when I said goodbye. I'm sorry for the tears I made her cry. So operator, won't you help me please? All I get is a busy signal. I didn't mean it when I said goodbye. I'm sorry for the tears I made her cry. So operator, won't you help me please? All I get is a busy signal.
And now back to our interview with David Fleischman on FM 89.3 WYPL.
Our daughter, 4 years ago, July the 8th, had a stroke at 43. And thank God she's fine, no problems. But when we went to Oklahoma City, and she was in the intensive care, and then she was in a room, and, you kind of build a relationship with the doctor. And the guy came to me the very last day, and he said, "Oh, I understand you're in the music business." And I said, "Yes, I am. I have been for quite a while." And he looked at me and he went, "I had a real serious decision to make a number of years ago, because he was a guitar player, played guitar. He said, whether to pursue a career in music or pursue a career in medicine." And I said, "Time out. Let me tell you what, you absolutely, positively, 100% made the right decision." He was like the head neuro guy at Mercy Hospital, Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's tough, but if you got what it takes, you'll just persevere. And I really find the people that are the most successful, they aren't successful because they want to do it. They're successful because they have to do it. There's something inside of them, I've got to do this. That's what the business has evolved into. It's tough out there, man. You got guys here, men and women in their 60s, that still play. And they're really terrific, musicians and singers and stuff. But there's so many, because it's Memphis, there's so many people making music that you've got all of these musicians, bands, entertainers, whatever word you want to use. There's so many of them, and there's only so few slots.
Right.
And there's always someone willing to do it cheaper. Therefore, I happen to think that music and musicians in Memphis, Tennessee have been devalued to a degree that they should never be, because when they promote Memphis, when Memphis is promoted, what do they talk about? They talk about Elvis, they talk about music, and they talk about food. And yet the music thing, and again, a lot of it has to do with this independence. There's just an independent vibe that runs through this city. And nothing would make me happier than to see a bunch of artists from here have some success. We spoke before we started doing this that when our grandson has a grandchild and that child comes to Memphis, I want Memphis music to still be relevant, alive, and important. Memphis and music have been so good to me for my entire life since I was 15 years old. It was a long time ago. So I feel when our daughter and them moved and we decided to come back to Memphis, Jay said something to me. She said, because it was totally unplanned, she said, maybe this is one of those cases where all of this that you've done all these years and the knowledge that you've accrued, maybe you're supposed to go back and help. And I kind of looked at her and I'm thinking, you see athletes and movie stars, entertainers on TV, and they all say that. And to be honest, I was always thinking, that's just the thing you're supposed to say. But when she said it and I thought about it, I realized that's a real genuine emotion. And like I said, people ask me and I'll just say, well, I've made my way in life in music out of Memphis, Tennessee, the music capital of the world as far as I'm concerned. And I truly feel that way. I mean, no disrespect to authors or filmmakers or sculptors, any other art form, but I truly believe music is the most powerful. And I say that because you can get 100 people in a room that speak 100 different languages, and they can't communicate verbally, but if the band's cooking, they all find 2 and 4. And that's what music does. It can make you laugh, it can make you cry, it can make you happy, make you sad, it can make you think. It's just amazing, and I don't take it for granted. I know how fortunate I am to have lived this life. It's been so exciting. I've done so much fun stuff. I've had a great partner to do it with, and I mean, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I'm so far ahead of the game, there'll be no complaints.
That's a great way to think about it. I agree with you 100%, David. Memphis is our heritage. We grew up here.
Yeah.
I've seen you and Jay twice here recently at Neil's, right. And the talent we heard there was just absolutely incredible.
I heard a girl Sunday. I never heard of her before, and
I know who you're talking about.
I found out that the 2 girls that were singing,
yes,
they were fantastic.
They were unbelievable.
I mean, and then I found out that she was trained in opera because she'd hit these real high notes like Wilson from Heart, but her pitch was perfect.
I know.
I'm going, man, that's a real singer right there.
She was great. She was great. David, thank you so much for
pleasure.
joining us. You're welcome here anytime you ever want to come back.
Anytime you need me, I'm here. I'm pretty easy to find.
That's great. Thank you so much, David.
My pleasure. Thank you, Alan.
I'm Alan Heidelberg, and I'm so glad you listened in to our interview with David Fleischman. We're going to end things now with the very first song that Flash and the Casuals did, called Bridget, on FM 89.3.
Bridget, high school queen. She's real tough, you know what I mean. When she hears a rockin' song, she can dog it all night long. Bridget, what a mess. Real long hair and a real tight dress. When I took her to the prom, they couldn't tell me where she'd come from. When she did the dog all over the place, they thought she'd come from outer space. Bridget, what a mess. Real long hair and a real tight dress. When I went to give her a ring, she did the nuttiest, craziest thing. When I told her to give her fingers to me, she said, I'll give you 2 and I'll owe you 3. Bridget, what a mess. Real long hair and a real tight dress. We had a real wild honeymoon. The white coats are coming, gonna get me soon. She's almost driving me out of my mind, 'cause every day at noon is Madison time. Bridget, what a mess. Real long hair and a real tight dress. Go, Bridget. Shake it one time for Flash.